Though not universally beloved amongst the primarchs, Lionel Johnson would indeed command great respect from each and every one of his brothers, earning the trust of even the Emperor himself, and granting him access to Terra's most ancient of armories, those not even allowed to the First Legion during the burgeoning days of the Imperial Crusade. This was a prospect that seemed to greatly unsettle Horus, and when the opportunity arose for Horus to celebrate the conquest of Olenor Prime, one of the greatest achievements of the Imperium up to that date, he would go out of his way to ensure the Dark Angels and their master were occupied elsewhere, denying them any place at the triumphant gathering, as Horus would take this opportunity to increase his chances to ascend to the esteemed position of War Master. It seemed the absence of the lion during the coronation did not escape notice. This omission was deemed a triumph by the ambitious War Master, yet it proved to be one of his few misjudgments, as Horus was accustomed to the manipulative nature of power, and had erroneously assumed that all the figures of authority would act in accordance to his own ambitions. However, this act shone a light to his thoughts, to the lion. Upon hearing of Horus's newfound status, Lionel Johnson remained undeterred in his military pursuits, showing neither approval nor envy. His stoic response seemed to gnaw at Horus due to being so unlike the rest of his fellow primarchs. Subsequently, Horus's descent into treachery unfolded following his corruption on Davin, and it is speculated that Lionel Johnson emerged amongst a scant few as one of his foremost concerns. The Dark Angels were seen by the Luna Wolves as formidable both in number at this point and martial prowess, wielding weaponry and psychic abilities nearly unparalleled by their peers. Moreover, their primarch stood as an unyielding bastion of loyalty, one only paralleled by Sanguinius and Dorn, all of which were prepared to confront any threat to the cause of imperial unity with resolute and grim determination. Amongst the primarchs, the War Master harbored no ordinary fear, yet the prospect of confronting the Lion in open conflict gave him pause. Should Lionel Johnson refuse allegiance to the traitorous cause, he would become an obstacle of priority to be eliminated. 3 Space Marine legions stood in the path of Horus's treachery before its inception, and while he sought to co-opt the White Scars and to annihilate or corrupt the Blood Angels as soon as possible, his intentions toward the Dark Angels were different. Horus aimed to exile them as long as possible, ensuring that they would remain distant until his dark designs were fully fulfilled. However, it seems that fate had other plans, as he would fail on all regards. The White Scars would never join him, the Blood Angels would battle on Terra against him, and the Dark Angels would reap a furious vengeance upon the War Master's forces. And even though he had been functionally exiled to one of the furthest reaches of the Imperial front lines, the Lion would re-emerge within the Imperium, relentless and resolute, as the Dark Angels would emerge during the Horus Heresy, as formidable, semi-independently functioning forces, conducting large-scale campaigns through isometric warfare and the use of superior firepower and tactics. Horus had been well aware of the potential threat posed by the Dark Angels, so he had orchestrated a series of deployments to the fringes of the Imperium, desiring to prevent their intervention in his schemes, at least temporarily. However, as the conflict unfolded, the Dark Angels proved themselves their betters, as they struck fear into their enemies. Even the Night Lords were terrified at Thramas, as the Dark Angels unleashed devastation upon those who had terrorized this southern galactic zone, leaving a trail of crushed traitor worlds in their wake. During the 200th year of the Great Crusade, it seemed that the Dark Angels found themselves in a crucial campaign set up by the War Master himself as a distraction during the year 998 M30, as they had been aimed towards a confederation of human worlds who had allied with Xenos of questionable allegiance. And over the span of 7 Terran years, from 998 M30 to 05 M31, the Dark Angels had been immersed in an arduous campaign. However, eventually news would reach their high command. It seemed that the War Master Horus, along with several primarchs including Angron, Mortarion, and Fulgrim, had renounced their loyalty to the Emperor. Information about this betrayal and the horrific atrocities committed on Isvan III where loyalist Astartes were mercilessly eradicated by virus bombing, reached the ears of the Lion himself. In this mass upheaval, Lionel Johnson and the Dark Angels suspected a deeper scheme would be at play. He believed that their deployment to the Shield Worlds in this campaign had been a calculated move by Horus to scatter the loyal forces of the Imperium, also noting how his brother Sanguinius had been essentially set to the opposite side of the galaxy. Nevertheless, the Emperor's response was swift, as a strike force was comprised of 7 full Space Marine legions, which were dispatched to the Isstvan system in order to confront Horus head-on. As they closed in on Isstvan 5, the stakes could not have been higher, as the fate of the Imperium seemed to hang in the balance. In the aftermath of Horus's multiple betrayals, Lionel Johnson found his forces still deeply entrenched, no matter how hard he tried, within the shield worlds of the Gordian League, rendering a swift response as necessary to deal with this daunting task of the unfolding treachery. The Lion's initial assessment projected that he would require nearly 8 solar months to properly disengage from the ongoing offensive operations and realign for a potential strike against Isstvan 5. However, recognizing the urgency of the situation, the Lion devised a daring plan, which, despite the logistical challenges that would come of it, he believed he could succeed, as he chose a select group of highly trained forces that could potentially achieve what a legion could not, if forced to operate under a singular combined goal. The orders would be issued to mobilize the Dark Angels' reserve squadrons within the Termgrass system as their assigned destination. Their primary objective was the strategic Forge World of Damat. It was imperative, in his view, to prevent Horus from obtaining the vast arsenal needed to fortify Isstvan 5 against the impending loyalist assault. The Lion himself would personally lead this expedition, commanding a battle group comprised of 15 formidable warships, secrecy becoming paramount as the Dark Angels prepared for their secretive mission. This was in large part due to the Lion being acutely aware of the possibility of enemy agents tracking their movements, as the stakes were high, as within this formidable Forge World lay some of the most powerful siege engines ever created, the Ordinati, capable of shattering even the most impregnable of fortifications, conceivable by Dorn himself. Arriving swiftly within the system in a mere few days due to how quickly he had reacted, after the Dark Angels found themselves in a pivotal encounter, decimating the forces of Horus at the Xanthus starport. The admiral of the War Master's fleets were faced with the formidable Astartes of Lionel Johnson and the Dark Angels' primarch's cunning tactics, as they realized that there was no viable path to secure the coveted siege machines themselves, and faced with an unassailable obstacle, retreat became the only recourse. A bitter acknowledgement of their defeat and the thwarting of the War Master's plans, as it seemed, even with his brief presence on the battlefield, the Lion had proven himself the War Master's better. It was in this wake of this tactical triumph that Lionel Johnson convened with Perturabo, the primarch of the Iron Warriors Legion, aboard his flagship, the Invincible Reason. It seems that Perturabo had been chosen to be the bearer of grim tidings, revealing the arrival of the 4th Legion in the Isstvan system, as he was supposedly poised to confront Horus himself. As he informed the Lion of Ferrus Manus and his Iron Hands Legion surging ahead in order to meet the Emperor's children and bring retribution unto the War Master. Through this whole meeting, it seemed that Perturabo was successful in masking his true intentions, as he spun a tale of logistical necessity, feigning desire to replenish his vessel at the now raised Xanthus starport, before pressing onward into the fray. Yet it seems, with the truth, or what seemed to be the truth, laid bare, the Dark Angel's decisive actions had dashed his plans. Perturabo would proceed to probe the Lion regarding his discovery of the Ordinati siege engines, which led to the Lion revealing a glimpse into his meticulously laid out plan, and how he had discovered these great weapons while reviewing records of the Great Crusade's history, which had been concealed in a message from Horus to the Emperor himself. And it seems that Perturabo's gambit worked, as the Lion entrusted the Lord of Iron with the retrieval of these potent siege engines. And this was where the Lion's path would once more diverge, leading him once more to staging operations from the Gordians League's shield worlds, rather than outright confronting Horus and the traitorous forces, much like his foolhardy brother Ferrus Manus had done. And seeing the fate of the first primarch slain during the Heresy, it was a smart choice. In the murky aftermath of the Dropsite Massacre and the initiation of Horus's treachery, it would be noted that Conrad Kurz, the harbinger of terror for the Imperium, would be set towards the distant reaches of Singasla, a desolate world veiled in the shadows of a looming asteroid belt. And amidst the chaos of obscurity, the Night Lords would prepare to unleash a campaign of terror and bloodshed, heretofore unseen upon the unsuspecting strongholds of Hurldar and Thormas. Their mission was simple: to secure the flanks of the War Master's impending strike upon Terra, lest the tide of rebellion falter against the resolute defenders of mankind's throne world. Amidst this system, it seemed loyalties wavered between the Emperor and the traitorous War Master, leading to the Dark Angels finding themselves engaged in protracted conflicts known as the Thramas Crusade. For nearly 3 grueling years, the fate of one of the Mechanicum's greatest forges hung in the balance. Their allegiance was a prize coveted by both sides during the galactic struggle. In a calculated maneuver to sway the line to the side of treachery, the Night Haunter Conrad Kurz orchestrated a clandestine rendezvous on the desolate planet of Thangulsla. A deep void beacon would be launched, which guided the Dark Angels on the path towards the planet. And with the stage set, the 2 Primarchs, accompanied by their stalwart vanguards, conveyed upon the soil of the world. Initially, the discourse came with a semblance of civility, masking the underlying currents of tension between the two. Yet beneath the veneer of diplomacy, animosity simmered, and ancient grudges came to the surface. As words turned into actions, accusations became blows. As the fragile facade of camaraderie shattered, and outright conflict began between the 2 titans. The confrontation between the Night Haunter and Lionel Johnson reached a crescendo of violence as the 2 were entrapped in an all-consuming melee where ancient grudges and bitter resentments were fueled by the flames of conflict. As the Night Haunter sought to extinguish the life of his former brother, the Lion found himself ensnared in the grasp of a deadly embrace. Yet in a moment of heroic intervention, a valiant Dark Angel plunged his blade deep into the back of the Night Haunter, saving his Primarch from certain demise and ensuring the continuation of the Imperium through his actions. As amidst the now ignited combat between both legions, the wounded Primarchs were whisked away from the fray, their survival ensuring the continuation of their bitter struggle for dominance within the Aegis subsector. It would be on the tumultuous year of 8M31 when a cryptic message whispered throughout the void reached the ears of the Dark Angels, their astropathic choir noting the movements of the traitorous forces, prompting the swift mobilization of the First Legion. Arriving at the Perditus system, the Dark Angels intercepted an ongoing conflict between the Iron Hands 98th Clan Company under Kauslar Larmak and one of the most formidable Death Guard contingents within the Legion, led by the nefarious First Captain Callus Typhon. At the heart of this bloody struggle lay an ancient artifact, the Tachula Engine, a semi-sentient relic steeped in both mystery and power, an ancient device part of a trio alongside the Ouroboros and its nameless counterpart, which promised the ability to bend and bow the fabric of reality itself, waving threads of temporal energy in order to traverse the vast expanse of space itself, almost completely obfuscating the need to travel throughout the warp. And this was the coveted prize that both legions were so desperate to claim. Sensing the looming threat posed by the Dark Angels, both factions quickly withdrew from the battlefield at the behest of the Lion's merciless gaze. And it seemed that this was the opportunity the Lion required to further his own agenda, capturing the engine for the Dark Angels' cause. In a controversial act of defiance, the Lion decreed the annihilation of Perditas, a decision met with incredulity from both friend and foe alike, as he harnessed the arcane powers of the engine to guarantee none other would threaten the Imperium with such a weapon. They embarked on a perilous journey, absconding through sectors of the warp, and essentially ignoring many of the entities lurking deep within the Imperium. And now it seems that the Lion would break another oath. In defiance of the Emperor's decree, Lionel Johnson resurrected the Order of Librarians within his legion, commanding them to unleash their psychic powers to combat the malevolent entities that plagued the Imperium. Yet it seemed that this bold move ignited some dissent within his ranks, due to him challenging the sanctity of the Emperor's edicts. As tension boiled, the Lion, in a fit of fury, confronted and ultimately struck down Chaplain Namail, an act which underscored the tearing schism within the Legion. And eventually, the Lion would encounter a demonic entity known as Kairos Fateweaver, an emissary of Tzeentch, the architect of fate. And in a battle of will and ideologies, where the greater demons sought to ensnare the Primarch's Legion to the web of chaos, the Lion stood undeterred, unwavering in his devotion to his father. With a righteous fury burning in his eyes, he would go on to vanquish the Lord of Change, piercing its twisted form with his righteous blade. In a final contemptuous taunt, the Lion would mock the demon's supposed omniscience, challenging the fabric of fate itself, and showing that he could change his own destiny. Thus, the Lion's actions left him as a solitary beacon within the darkness of treachery. Utilizing the engine a second time, the Dark Angels executed a meticulously planned ambush on the Night Lord's fleet while it was transitioning from the subsector itself. This assault saw the Night Lords suffer a crippling defeat that left their Primarch, Conrad Kurz, mortally wounded after facing his brother, Lionel Johnson, in brutal combat once more. Thanks to the Legion's strategic acumen and superb execution, the Night Lord's fleet was all but decimated, losing a total of 12 capital ships and approximately 1/4 of their Legion's fleet proper to the Dark Angels' relentless assault. However, the Night Lords did manage to flee once again, with their critically injured Primarch in tow, thereby denying the Lion's satisfaction at ending Kurz's life, once and for all. In the aftermath of this, as Kurz recovered, he would launch a desperate counterattack alongside his first captain, Sevatar, and an elite cadre of Atramatur Terminators, led by himself in a daring boarding action, attempting to strike at the Dark Angels within the Invincible Reason. The ferocity of this assault resulted in the deaths of over 12 Terminators and the capture of Sevatar, along with whatever surviving remnants of Night Lords were left. This desperate move underscored the Night Lords' tendency for ruthlessness, and despite being Astartes being one of the less combat-effective legions, despite some losses, the Dark Angels emerged as fully victorious. Yet, Conrad Kurz was able to flee the Lion's wrath, evading the Dark Angels for several months as he hid within the shadows of the bowels of the Invincible Reason, within the Lion's very own flagship, all the while spreading bursts of terror upon the mortal crew, as the Night Lord's Primarch methodically killed every single hunter team dispatched by the Lion to track him down. After losing several squads of Dark Angels, the Lion took it upon himself to take up the hunt and search for his psychotic brother. Meanwhile, the remaining Night Lord captives orchestrated a daring escape, as they successfully slipped into the void, evading the Dark Angel's grip. As the galaxy had now been rent asunder due to the Ruin Storm, which was a cataclysmic warp storm that blotted out the light of the Astronomicon, rendering warp travel nearly impossible for all, splitting the Imperium in twain, all after the harrowing Battle of Calth. The Dark Angels realized that they were unable to directly return to Terra in order to aid in its defense, even with the powerful T'Chula engine at their disposal. As the Ruin Storm raged on, Loyalist forces had to adapt to a new reality, one where the Imperium was divided, as the Dark Angels were cut off from their brothers and the Emperor, faced with the daunting task of navigating the fractured galaxy while continuing their operations opposing the traitorous legions. Miraculously, the First Legion managed to lock onto a beacon of an alien device known as the Ferris, located within the world of Slotha. This beacon allowed the Dark Angels to safely navigate the warp in order to reach the capital world of the realm of Ultramar, Macragge. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by the now haggard and frustrated primarch Rebut Guilliman and Sanguinius, whose warriors had also been guided to the realm of Ultramar via the Ferris. The convergence of the three primarchs set the stage for a pivotal moment in the Horus Heresy, one which would largely remain unremembered. Recognizing the necessity to continue fighting against the traitors and safeguarding what remnants remained of the Emperor's vision, the three leaders formed Imperium Secundus, what would eventually become an unremembered empire, as Guilliman proclaimed Sanguinius as the rightful heir to the Emperor, declaring him the new ruler of this emergent empire. Lionel Johnson was then appointed as the Lord Protector, in essence, the equivalent of the role of War Master, making him the supreme commander of all military forces within Imperium Secundus. Unfortunately, despite the promising start and the solid foundation of Imperium Secundus, this would be marred by the actions of Conrad Kurz, who had finally escaped the Invincible Reason and began a campaign of terror across Macragge. His goal was simple: to sow as much fear and disruption as possible within the new realm. In this critical juncture, the efforts of Guilliman, Sanguinius, and the Line to establish a bastion of hope and a final home for humanity were continuously tested by the insidious actions of their renegade brother, who, while not the best combatant, was a master of asymmetric warfare and terror tactics. Eventually, both Guilliman and the Lion confronted Kurz, yet their attempts to kill him were unsuccessful, as the Night Lord's Primarch had laid a cunning trap. He had brought down an entire chapel upon the two Primarchs through the use of a series of planted explosives, allowing him to flee the scene. The Lion and Guilliman were only saved through the direct intervention of the loyalist Iron Warrior, Warsmith Barbarus d'Antioch, who was communicating with Guilliman at the time of their attack through a portal he had opened with the Ferris. On instinct, the Warpsmith would reach out across the portal and pull the two endangered Primarchs safely to Sultha. Feeling directly responsible for the Night Lord's rampage on Macragge, the Lion continued to obsessively haunt his wayward brother for the next 2 years. In 011 M31, the Lion finally had a slim lead on his brother's whereabouts within the Zaphas system, which had fallen to the combined efforts of the Word-Bearers and the World Eaters during their Shadow Crusade. The relentless pursuit of Kurz showed that the Lion truly found him as a preeminent threat, as he seemed to prioritize him over all his traitor brothers. The only issues seemed to arise as the Lion had to navigate the labyrinth of political and military landscapes which had been shaken up due to the Horus Heresy, as his relentless hunt now led him to a battleground controlled by the dark forces of the Word-Bearers. Farith Rildos, a lieutenant-elect of the Dark Angel's Deathwing, would eventually be charged with leading the hunt for Conrad Kurz himself. On the word of Zephath, the Dark Angels quickly uncovered the horrors perpetrated by the Word-Bearers Legion, as their dark rituals on the planet emphasized how far they had fallen. As a hunt for the Night Haunter led to multiple engagements against the forces of both the World Eaters and the Word-Bearers, with clashes reaching a fever pitch on the capital city of Nementus. Here the Dark Angels would demonstrate their tactical prowess and utterly annihilate both traitor forces upon the capital, as the survivors of Nementus were left to rebuild the world on their own in the aftermath of the Dark Angels' devastating, overwhelming victory. Meanwhile, it seemed the broader campaign saw the Dark Angels divided into specialized detachments, designed to target and tackle particular threats across the galaxy. Captain Ormond led one of these detachments in order to reinforce the Space Wolves against the insidious Alpha Legion in the Alexis Nebula. Another detachment, under the command of Corswain, was tasked by Lionel Johnson himself to hunt down Callus Typhon following the chaotic aftermath of the Battle of Perditus. As his obsessive hunt for Conrad Kurz drove the Line to further and further extremes, victories would mount. Yet even the victories and the countless enemies vanquished did not leave the Line satisfied, as his strategic acumen had been tested in war, and only wrath would stand. While pursuing the elusive Night Haunter, Lionel Johnson found himself in constant continuous conflict with Rabut Guilliman over policy decisions, particularly those regarding the security of Imperium Secundus. Their disagreements were exacerbated by the emergence of rebels on Macragge, which the Lion had been convinced were incited by the actions of Conrad Kurz. This situation would reach a critical point following the self-termination bombing on an Astartes convoy. In response to this, the Lion would implement martial law on Macragge, deploying the full might of the 1st Legion in order to restore order. Believing Kurz to be hiding within the rebellious Illyrim region, the Lion advocated for a massive orbital saturation bombardment in order to ensure Kurz's death. However, this led to fierce resistance from both Sanguinius and Guilliman, who opposed these drastic self-destructive measures. Instead, the Lion was forced to deploy the Legion's entire Death Wing, in particular, one which had been well versed in siege and close-quarters combat, in order to flush out Kurz and all the rebels. This conflict culminated in the assault on the city of Alma Mons, where the Lion finally cornered the Night Lord's primarch. The ensuing confrontation was brutal, as Kurz used his ability of foresight in order to predict the Lion's next move, but it seemed, once again, the Lion would be able to defy fate, changing the path of his blade, altering history with a single stroke of his mighty sword. After a fierce struggle, the Lion would emerge victorious. He would then directly demand to know why Kurz had turned away from the Emperor. Kurz's response met the Lion with chilling indifference. Why not? This exchange encapsulated the profound tragedy and divergence between the two primarchs, highlighting the depths of Kurz's fall. And this victory in Alma Mons showcased the Dark Angel's strategic brilliance, as even the ability to see the future was not able to overwhelm the Dark Angels. Eventually, the severely wounded Conrad Kurz was brought before both Sanguinius and Guilliman to stand trial. Their subsequent tribunal caused Kurz to only defend his actions, refusing to admit any form of guilt, as he argued that each primarch was created with a specific purpose in mind, and he was merely following in accordance to his nature and the Emperor's design, thereby believing he had committed no crimes. Kurz would further exacerbate the tensions between Guilliman and the Lion by accusing the latter of secretly ordering orbital bombardments in direct violation of Guilliman's orders to avoid unnecessary civilian casualties. These accusations infuriated the Lion, but proved to be true, as he attempted to slay Kurz, yet was stopped by Sanguinius, and in a fit of unyielding rage, Guilliman would seize Lionel Johnson's sword and break it across his armored thigh. The trial of Kurz revealed the deep-seated divisions even within the Loyalist ranks, and as the saga concluded, Sanguinius was the one to dismiss the Lord Protector, effectively ending the triumvirate. The Lion, while enraged, accepted his brother's decree. As he was banished from Imperium Secundus, he would lead the withdrawal of the Dark Angels from Macragge only hours later, leaving behind a trail of unresolved conflict. And in the chamber of the Tachula engine, aboard the Invisible Reason, the Lion would brood over the recent events, as he continued to question his actions over the last few decades, in particular the functional banishment of Luther and the death of Nemil, alongside other actions. These reflections weighed heavily on his mind. Eventually, he would order the engine to teleport himself and Hogwin, the Deathbringer, a voted lieutenant of the Deathwing, back to Macragge. Due to having had a realization, they would arrive just as Sanguinius was preparing to execute Kurz for his crimes. Interrupting the proceedings, the Lion commanded Sanguinius to halt his actions, as troops entered the room, demanding that the Lion surrender. Ready to end the Primarch of the 1st Legion, Lionel Johnson explained the reason for his intrusion. He highlighted Kurz's ability to see visions of the future, and repeated the Night Lord's claim that death would one day come at the hands of an assassin sent by the Emperor. At this, the Lion reasoned that if his prophecies were true, then it served as proof that the Emperor was alive beyond the barrier of the Ruinstorm, a revelation that cast a new light on the situation they were now dealing with, meaning that the Emperor's influence could still be reached, despite the chaos of Heresy. These moments did indeed bring a pause to the execution of Kurz, as Sanguinius, with his own ability for foresight, would realize the lion's explanation and acknowledge his own continuing visions of inevitable death. When Guilliman questioned the fate of Kurz, the lion knelt before his brothers and pledged to be Kurz's guardian, as Kurz would remain aboard the Invincible Reason as a permanent captive, where the lion would occasionally visit him, attempting to extract information from his prophetic visions. However, the Night Hunter seldom cooperated, and in the wake of these revelations, Imperium Secundus would be officially abolished, as the three primarchs, recognizing their unfortunate mistake, united in a new purpose, as they would lead their legions in a bold attempt to breach the Ruinstorm to reach Terra, now certain that the Emperor still lived, due to the combination of both Sanguinius's and Kurz's prophetic visions. Within the Ruinstorm, the combined Loyalist fleets encountered warp-born horrors as they heard tales of an entity called the Pilgrim, who had been spreading destruction upon the galaxy. Despite the Tachula engine, they would fail to navigate the Ruinstorm, which frustrated the Lion to no end. And during the Battle of Parian, Lionel Johnson commanded the Dark Angels Astartes with strategic precision. All the while, Sanguinius would receive a vision, revealing that they needed to return to the origin of the Horus Heresy, the world of Davin. This revelation would set the stage for the second Battle of Davin, where the Dark Angels would once again shine. In the climactic turn of events, the Loyalist forces changed their direction within the Ruinstorm. Rather than going to Terra, they went to its epicenter, Davin, where they confronted an immense demonic army on both the ground and the skies, in a historic clash. Initially hesitant, both Guilliman and the Lion harbored thoughts of obliterating the accursed world upon their arrival. However, Sanguinius surprised the Lion by boarding the Invincible Reason and bringing the still captive Conrad Kurz along with him, as Sanguinius sought to harness Kurz's own prophetic talents in order to decipher his own purpose on Davin, hoping it would aid in the Emperor's salvation. This led to the launching of a full-scale ground assault, as all three legions converged. This charge was primarily led by Sanguinius, while the Lion, seething in fury, temporarily contemplated ordering an exterminatus upon the planet and his brother. Yet in a pivotal moment, the Lion recognized that these thoughts were not his own. Unlike other primarchs, he was able to quickly notice the influence of another entity upon his mind. Descending upon the planet's surface, it seemed the truth had been revealed to him. Sanguinius had found himself ensnared within a warp portal, engaging in a life-or-death struggle against one of the most powerful demons of Chaos Undivided, the demon Madiel, while Guilliman and the Lion would fight desperately to reach him. All the while, above them, Guilliman's flagship met its demise at the hands of the demon ship Vertas Ferrum. Eventually, both Guilliman and the Lion would find themselves fighting side by side, their unity as brothers once again solidified, as they vanquished one of the most formidable soul grinder demon engines ever created. After a prolonged struggle, it seemed that Sanguinius was able to defeat the demon utterly and completely in order to break free, as the Space Marines would quickly withdraw to the safety of orbit, which would lead to the decisive move to obliterate Davin by the use of cyclonic torpedoes, severing its ties to real space permanently, causing the demonic fleet to vanish utterly and completely from real space. And it seems that this was a rather fortuitous move, as the destruction caused a small fracture to open within the Ruinstorm. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Guilliman and the Lion both devised a daring strategy, while Sanguinius and the Blood Angels would press onwards towards Terra, fulfilling the prophecies of destiny that Sanguinius had viewed as the best chance of survival for humanity. Guilliman and the Lion would orchestrate diversionary attacks on the traitor fleets, allowing the Blood Angels to make it across this heavily defended sector of space, unimpeded. As the siege of Terra loomed on the horizon, a series of traitorous forces would be diverted by the Lion and stopped from reaching the throne world by launching key attacks on traitorous strongholds, all the while having a small cadre of Dark Angels on Terra. The Lion was able to shift the forces of the traitors from the Emperor's children to the Death Guard by attacking both Chemos and Barbarous. The Dark Angels were tasked with, in essence, disrupting and permanently scattering all signs of enemy logistics and crushing their morale, in a calculated move that, while not achieving the same glories as the others, would have significant repercussions on the enemy forces throughout the Heresy. Within Terra itself, as the siege raged on, the Dark Angels on the world fought to protect one of the beacons of the Astronomicon and prevent further traitor interactions. The vast majority of the Dark Angels would be consumed by the thirst for retribution, vowing to unleash a vengeance unseen by the galaxy beforehand upon the traitors, as the majority of the Legion plunged themselves into a relentless campaign of annihilation known as the Passage of Angels, which culminated in the Lion's almost complete and total annihilation of all forces of the Death Guard upon Barbarous and the Emperor's children upon Chemos. Determined to rally all allies he could for his crusade, Lionel Johnson steered his forces towards Deliverance, the homeworld of the Raven Guard, and rendezvoused with Corvus Corax and Leman Russ. The Lion had noted the absence of Corax from the front lines of the conflict, but his concerns were assuaged by Russ, who emphasized with Corax's unfortunate situation at the time, whose forces had been vastly depleted, and was aiming to use what little he had as strategically as possible. However, they were united on their quest for vengeance, as Russ pledged his full support of the Space Wolves for the Lion's campaign, deploying as many warriors as he could muster, clad in Mark VI Corvus pattern power armor. However, Corax, unable to waste what few resources he had on a campaign driven in part by emotion, dispatched only a modest contingent of Raven Guard. And despite their fervent determination and their direct attempts to reach Terra at any point, they would arrive too late, as the Emperor laid mortally wounded and the Angel slain. The fate of these two Imperial martyrs had been sealed by the hands of Horus Lupercal, and in the turbulent aftermath of the Siege of Terra, the loyal remnants of the Imperium would struggle to reclaim their shattered domain. But once again, the Dark Angels would emerge as stalwart champions in an event which would become known as the Great Scouring, with resolute and unending determination, along with no shortage of hatred and wrath. They would pursue the fleeing rebel forces, seeking to purge their taint from the galaxy. And amidst this chaos, the First Legion's path led them to Caliban, which had long been shrouded in the ruin storm, but now an opening had been made, in the dark days after Horus's betrayal had ended. However, upon their return, the Dark Angels were met with an unexpected hostility as they came under fire from their planet's own surface. Deciding to personally investigate this betrayal, Lionel Johnson uncovered a sinister plot orchestrated by his once trusted comrade and brother, Luther, who had been poisoned with the bitterness of jealousy and led astray to sow discord amongst the Dark Angels garrisoned on the planet, directly turning many of them against their primarch, while influencing the rest to believe that their primarch had been the one to turn traitor against them. This led to the Lion forming the devastating decision to go with what seems to be his go-to, an orbital bombardment upon the planet, shattering the defenses of Caliban in a desperate bid to root out all corruption festering within the world. Once again, going to the surface, directly into the fortress monastery, he would confront Luther in a climactic showdown, which should have been ended in quick order. However, much like Horus had been elevated by the malevolent forces of chaos, it seemed Luther, too, would gain such power, one which would drive a mere space marine to be able to match one of the greatest primarchs in direct combat, as their battle would be titanic in proportions, while the very foundations of Caliban would tremble beneath their ferocious combat. The duel would rage on, as the relentless bombardment from orbit would take its toll upon the planet's crust, unleashing a catastrophic destruction upon Caliban. Despite his wounds, the Lion hesitated and even failed to deliver the final blow upon Luther, torn between the duality of loyalty and duty to a man who had been his brother, his mentor, and amidst the ruins of the shattered world, Luther would use this momentary lapse in the Lion's Guard to score a serious blow, leaving the primarch gravely injured. As the weight of his actions descended upon him, Luther realized that he would have to flee. As he collapsed to the ground, his will to fight shattered, but for the Lion it seemed to be too late, as he would disappear, ushered into the darkness by the Watchers in the Dark. And it seemed that with the loss of control over Luther, the forces of chaos would unleash their full wrath upon the world of Caliban, shrouding the planet in a tempest of warp energies, as a climactic storm tore the very fabric of the world apart, causing it to fracture and crumble, leaving only the fortress monastery of the Order standing amidst the ruined chaos of what remained. In large part, this was due to the formidable Dark Age of technology defensive shield barriers that the fortress had been outfitted with. Meanwhile, those Dark Angels who had succumbed to Luther's twisted influence, whether knowingly or unknowingly, turning to the worship of chaos, found themselves ensnared in the rolling tides of the warp, which would cast them adrift across a vast expanse of space and time, as they would become known as the Fallen Angels, or the Fallen, by the rest of the Legion. And the Dark Angels would then commence to venture into the remnants of Caliban, now reduced to a mere asteroid housing the fortress monastery. They would encounter a scene shrouded in mystery as they stumbled upon Luther, uttering cryptic words of the Lion's fate, claiming that their primarch had been spirited away by the mysterious Watchers in the Dark, and that he was destined to return one day to absolve Luther of his transgressions. Yet despite their search throughout the entirety of the fortress monastery, which would eventually become the Rock, the Dark Angels found no sign, not even a speck of blood, from their missing leader. Unbeknownst to his kin, the Lion still drew breath, albeit in a catatonic state of the deepest slumber, concealed within a clandestine chamber deep beneath the fortress monastery. This chamber had been veiled from the prying eyes of even his own brethren, and even the Lion himself originally had no idea that this chamber existed. There he would lay dormant, his existence sustained by the elusive Watchers in the Dark, and he would remain a closely guarded secret, hidden from all but the most clandestine of his custodians. In the wake of the Horus Heresy, a shadow would now cast itself upon the once illustrious Dark Angels Legion, with their primarch now vanished and their brethren on Caliban seemingly completely ensnared by the seductive whispers of chaos. The Sons of the Lion vowed to cleanse their tarnished honor by bringing each and every one of the fallen to account. However, they would shroud the tale of Caliban's fall in secrecy, fearing vengeful repercussions for their internal strife if it were to become public knowledge. In order to prevent the damning truth from surfacing, they would establish what would later become known as an Inner Circle, a clandestine assembly of the Legion's elite, tasked with vigilantly guarding against any signs of corruption amongst their rank, and with protecting the history of their Legion. The web of secrecy birthed an atmosphere rife with suspicion and paranoia, which would become the calling cards of the Dark Angels, an enduring legacy which would persist with the chapter to this day. And despite their efforts to conceal the climactic events of Caliban's demise, the magnitude of the disaster was impossible to fully conceal, as across the galaxy, the psychic disturbances heralded the planet's sundering. In the aftermath of Caliban's fall, the Dark Angels would begin a meticulous campaign of concealment, binding each and every remaining battle brother to an oath of unwavering silence regarding the events that transpired that day. While the narrative may not withstand rigorous scrutiny, the turbulent state of the galaxy and the Imperium offered a rather fortuitous shield, with the traitor legions emboldened near the Eye of Terror, particularly the Night Lords, who would wreak havoc with deadly ambushes. The Dark Angels themselves would engage in a relentless pursuit of their once formidable foes. Amidst this chaos, and with the loss of their homeworld, they would attack traitorous strongholds who had stubbornly endured, as rebellious planets awaited retribution, and the encroaching menace of Xenos loomed in the horizon, the Dark Angels would once more venture out into the void. In the wake of the Civil War, the Imperium was now vulnerable to the surge of Xenos assaults, with planets across the galaxy facing dire threats, with their forces rebuilding the rock into not just a home base, but a mobile platform for which they may attack all the enemies of humanity. The Dark Angels would deploy their fleets to any distress signals echoing throughout the void, dividing their forces as they all forged alliances with other Space Marine chapters, in particular such as the Blood Angels, who had been embattled in the Cadian sector at this moment. Together they would wage a relentless campaign against the traitorous and demonic forces which thirsted to reclaim a place upon the Imperium, as the Dark Angels and Blood Angels would venture to reclaim worlds and drive the enemies of mankind to exile, leading to the rebirth of the Angels of Death in these moments. Pivotal battles such as Septon Prime led the Dark Angels Terminator companies to display that they still had the power epitomized by the First Legion, earning praise as the defenders of the Imperium's realms. However, upon their return to the Rock, the Dark Angels were confronted with unsettling revelations. Despite their beliefs that the majority of their traitorous kin had perished in the cataclysm that had consumed Caliban, it became clear that most of the fallen had survived, though the fate of the Primarch remained shrouded in mystery. The librarians would be able to detect faint traces of the fallen's presences across the galaxy, as their psychic signatures faded with each passing moment. In the wake of this revelation of yet surviving fallen angels, the Masters of the First became faced with a dilemma, one that struck at the heart of their loyalty to the Imperium. On the one hand, the dreaded potential exposure of their Legion's dark past, if unveiled, could tarnish the honor of their missing father, irrevocably dismantling what little stability remained in the Imperium. Yet amidst the shadows of disgrace, a glimmer of hope emerged. The continued existence of the fallen angels presented the possibility of redemption. If the wayward brethren could all be hunted down and brought to repentance, the stain upon the Dark Angels' honor may be cleansed, and they could bear Legion numbers once again. Thus, the Grand Masters of the Inner Circle would swear oaths that would reverberate through the corridors of time as long as a single fallen angel drew breath unrepentant. The Dark Angels would remain bound by their oath of atonement, condemned to pursue redemption until the last of the fallen was accounted for. Thus began the clandestine crusade that would define the destiny of the Dark Angels and their successor chapters for millennia to come. Theirs became a relentless pursuit, an unyielding quest to expunge the secret shame that stained their legacy. No sacrifice was too great, no battlefield too precious, as they would wage an unending war of repentance to erase the hidden blemish. To this day, the Dark Angels and their successor chapters of the Unforgiven remain vigilant, their duty clear to capture and or eliminate the fallen, being their most sacred and solemn obligation, surpassing all others, even if it means slaying custodians and the Emperor's most loyal. Such is the weight of their brethren that they have forsaken a myriad of battlefields across the Emperor's domain, for even the faintest whisper of a fallen demands their full focus, along with their unwavering attention. The tumultuous year of 999 M41 plunged the Imperium into chaos. Responding swiftly to this unsettling development, Supreme Grandmaster Azrael initiated a daring crusade into the Fenris system, only to find it besieged by the malevolent forces of the Warp, with the Fenrisian worlds engulfed in a nightmarish demonic incursion. Azrael faced a harrowing decision. With the relentless advance of an infernal horde, he would reluctantly sanction the orbital bombardment, much like his father, of Midgardia, a world overrun by chaos. Meanwhile, aboard the Rock, a sinister presence of shape-shifting changelings was detected, and it soon became clear that the changeling had been the puppeteer orchestrating this sinister conflict between the Dark Angels and their ancient adversaries. In the Long War, as they engaged in combat to aid the Space Wolf, it soon became clear that this was merely a part of a more intricate web of deception, merely a fragment in a greater scheme. The mastermind of this great ploy was none other than Magnus the Red, the demon primarch of the Thousand Suns. As the demonic onslaught threatened to consume the rock itself, a fragile alliance was forged in a manner that would allow the Space Wolves to board the rock, if necessary. Their timely intervention and a detachment of Grey Knights repelled the infernal tide. Yet despite the shared triumph, the scars of confrontation left the once tenuous relationship between the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves more strained than ever before, due to the impropriety shown to the Space Wolves. Around the twilight of 999 M41, the Imperium was plunged into chaos once again as relentless hordes of zealots surged forth from the hellish depths of the Eye of Terror. At the helm of this climactic onslaught stood Abaddon the Despoiler, orchestrating another one of his infamous crusades. This one would be the 13th Black Crusade. Amidst the maelstrom of battle, the keen-eyed Dark Angels discerned the unmistakable presence of the Fallen, their ancient nemesis, and elsewhere brothers amongst the Chaos devotees. Sensing the opportunity to capture the Fallen, the Dark Angels boldly commanded all the Unforgiven in the area to join them in a perilous campaign against the renegade forces. As the conflict unfolded, the Dark Angels became embroiled in a series of grueling engagements across the embattled Cadian sector. Amongst these trials by fire, they would be forced to repel onslaughts by unending demonic war hosts, led by the malevolent greater demon known as Karhunk, and they were successful as they would push back the encroaching darkness of said greater demon. However, the tempestuous nature of the warp conspired to keep the fractured Imperial forces scattered and isolated, and despite the valorous efforts of the 4th Company under the esteemed Master Kahariel, they were able to properly besiege what walls had been taken by Chaos in Cadia itself. Yet they could not forestall the inevitable, as Cadia would succumb to the inexorable onslaught of Chaos, as Abaddon the Despoiler would careen his final remaining Blackstone fortress into Cadia itself. Within the rock, the librarians of the Dark Angels were besieged by ominous premonitions, and while most of the glimpses of these futures were fleeting and fragmented, one revelation seared itself onto the consciousness of Ezekiel, the esteemed Grand Master of the Librarius. In his vision, Ezekiel beheld the full extent of the Fallen, whose numbers now surpassed even the darkest fears harbored by the Inner Circle, reaching near or greater than Legion numbers. It would be revealed that Luther, the once loyal brother and mentor of Lionel Johnson, had been the one to orchestrate this resurgence of almost the entirety of the First Legion that had turned traitor, and he had also grown their numbers through countless Chaos devotees. As Ezekiel's vision unfolded, the fabric of reality itself trembled, foretelling of a looming cataclysm of unprecedented magnitude. This foreboding prophecy was soon realized with the aftermath of the fall of Cadia and the 13th Black Crusade's zenith. With a deafening roar, the cosmos was rent asunder, with the emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum, an immense tear in the fabric of space colloquially known as the Great Rift, which stretched across the galaxy like a gaping wound, as the Great Rift would eclipse even the Eye of Terror, plunging vast swaths of the Imperium into darkness and uncertainty. Trapped within this desolate expanse of the now named Imperium Nihilus, the rock, the bastion of the Dark Angels, found itself severed from the guiding light of the Emperor's Astronomicon, cast amidst the turbulent tides of the galactic void. During the tumult known as the Era Indomitus, when the Imperium grappled with the aftermath of the Great Rift and the reawakening of a Primarch, a sinister event would unfold in the hollowed confines of the rock. Amidst the waning darkness of Noctis Anthrena, the rock found itself once more besieged by a malevolent force led by the fallen demon prince Morbus, as a horde of demonic entities breached the formidable void shields enveloping the Dark Angel's asteroid fortress. What followed was a harrowing clash that echoed through the corridors of the rock, from its grand halls to even the lowest of its sublevels. As the battle reached a crescendo, the demon invaders abruptly vanished just as they had appeared, leaving behind a wake of devastation and despair. Yet amidst the chaos, a clandestine agenda had unfolded deep within the rock's dungeons. Concealed from all but the highest echelons of the Dark Angel's leadership, a secret prisoner had languished in captivity. This was none other than the arch-betrayer Luther, former mentor of Lionel Johnson. In a stroke of audacious subterfuge, this assault on the rock was orchestrated to liberate Luther from his confines, as Supreme Grandmaster Azrael harbored grave concerns that the battle had been merely a diversion orchestrated by the machinations of the fallen. However, burdened with the weight of this clandestine knowledge, Azrael was compelled to maintain a veil of secrecy, for the revelation of Luther's captivity and subsequent escape could unravel the very fabric of the Dark Angels. Amidst the mystery of the now torn asunder expanse of the Imperium, the shrine world of Darkmoor became the grim host for a tragedy of epic proportions. Drawn by the whispers of their librarians, elements from a myriad of unforgiven chapters, including the Angel's Vengeance, the Consecrators, and the Guardians of the Covenant, descended upon this planet. Their purpose clear: to uncover the newly materialized fallen. Yet in a cruel twist of fate, the hunters became the haunted. It was a trap. The warp storms that had allowed their arrival intensified, plunging the entirety of the world into chaos, as the unforgiven found themselves ensnared by a deadly trap. Upon setting foot on Dankmoor's surface, they were not merely quarry, but they were met by scenes of desolation and carnage. Once grand cathedrals lay in ruins, their sanctity violated, while the blood of innocents stained the soil. Amidst the rubble and death, an insidious ambush awaited them. Legions of demons, chaos space marines, and renegades alike lurked in the shadows, poised to strike at the heart of the unforgiven. What ensued was a climactic battle, mirroring the intensity of those which occurred during the Horus Heresy, as a symphony of death and despair would echo throughout the history of the Unforgiven. In the wake of this massacre, the Unforgiven faced their darkest hour. From a proud contingent of 8,000 Space Marines, only a scant few emerged. Their numbers had been decimated outright by the onslaught. Yet amidst this, there was some hope. In their desperate pursuit, they had found traces of Cypher, a mysterious figure intertwined with the fallen. The surviving Space Marines stumbled upon a hidden artifact of untold power, a secret teleportation device that offered them a slender chance at escape from the clutches of utter doom. Amidst this galactic upheaval, the Imperium found itself met with a resurgence of a new breed of warrior, the Primaris Space Marines. Rabut Guilliman, the legendary primarch of the Ultramarines, had risen from the ashes to lead the Imperium's forces during the Indominus Crusade, bringing with him the formidable Primaris Space Marines reinforcements, which would be a great boon to the beleaguered ranks of the Dark Angels and their kin amongst the Unforgiven. In the wake of the harrowing tragedies, Supreme Grandmaster Azrael of the Dark Angels convened an urgent council, summoning the Supreme Grandmasters of all the Unforgiven to the Rock. And through their efforts of their librarians, they were able to pierce the Great Rift, drawing in loyal sons of the Lion from even the most far-flung reaches of the galaxy to their ancestral stronghold. Even though not all heeded their call, many successor chapters would vanish into the abyss, while others became entangled in a myriad of conflicts that beset the Imperium from all sides. As Azrael awaited the arrival of his brethren, a new fleet appeared on the horizon. This was that of the resurrected Lord Commander of the Imperium himself, Rabut Guilliman. Fearing retribution for hidden truths of the past, Azrael grappled with a momentous decision. Should he order a withdrawal of what appeared to be a legion via the assembled Unforgiven, or should he stand defiant against Guilliman's delegation? In the end, he chose neither, allowing the Lord Commander's fleet to dock unimpeded and to refill the beleaguered forces of the Dark Angels. Guilliman's arrival heralded not condemnation, but much needed reinforcements, and it stood as a testament to the enduring bonds of brotherhood amidst the trials of the Imperium. As the Dark Angels met their new Primaris brethren, they noticed that these warriors were indeed forged from the very essence of Lionel Johnson. As they strode forth from the depths of Archmagus Dominus Belisarius Call's immense vessel, each clad in the resplendent Mark X power armor, all adorned with the hues of the Dark Angels and their successors, gathered within the hallowed halls of the rock. Guilliman, the resurrected commander of the Imperium, convened a war council addressing the looming threats that besieged the Imperium. There, he unveiled his grand designs for the continuation of the Indominus Crusade and expounded upon his revisions to the sacred Codex Astartes. In a moment of solemn allegiance, Supreme Grandmaster Azrael and his brothers knelt before the Ultramarines Primarch, swearing their chapter's service to the newly reborn Imperium. With the arrival of Primaris reinforcements, the Dark Angels ventured into the shadows that lurked beyond the light of the Emperor's Astronomicon, facing off against warp storms in the galactic north, saving a myriad of uncountable isolated worlds. Azrael would assume command, orchestrating the response of the inner circle to the cries of distress that could only be answered by the Dark Angels' technological prowess, with ancient engines that allowed them to shift into space with more security than the average void vessel. As their relentless pursuit of justice echoed throughout the galaxy, the Dark Angels and their successors embarked once again on the eternal hunt for the fallen, their gaze now primarily fixated upon Cypher and the elusive demon prince Marbras, whose secrets may hold the key to the redemption of their ancient sins. Eventually, they would come into contact with a changeling who had sparked a rebellious war against many planets within the Stygius sector. In response to this, the Dark Angels and their Unforgiven brethren rallied to confront the change hosts, standing shoulder to shoulder with the stalwart and glorious Mordian Iron Guard, along with the fierce Space Wolves. Together, they would wage war against the renegades of the Thousand Sons traitor legions. And despite the long-standing tensions between the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels, the dire circumstances demanded unity, and both chapters would acquiesce. And while individual skirmishes between champions would be inevitable, the focus remained on the larger battles ahead. Initial losses were swiftly replenished as the conflict would escalate, and it would become clear that victory was beyond reach. Only the timely intervention of an Aldari strike force from craftworld Ulthwé allowed the beleaguered Space Marines to withdraw, leaving the Stygius system in the clutches of Tzeentch's minions for now. As the bonds forged in the crucible of combat led the Primaris to be more and more accepted by their firstborn counterparts, it seemed that unlike some, such as the Flesh Terrors, the Dark Angel would swiftly integrate the Primaris fully into the ranks. With each new addition, the chapter meticulously shaped these new neophytes to align with their exacting standards, ensuring that the Primaris would seamlessly integrate into the ranks of the Unforgiven. In the wake of battlefield exploits, a decisive choice loomed for the Firstborn: whether to embrace the transformative Rubicon Primaris procedure, and while some were swayed by the awe-inspiring physical capabilities displayed by the new Primaris counterparts, it seemed others staunchly clung to traditions, adamantly refusing to undergo such changes. Amidst this internal conflict, cautionary voices echoed, warning of the perilous risks involved. The procedure did at the time carry a very high mortality rate, promising only a grim possibility of significant casualties for the chapter. Yet for those forced into the transformative journey by grave injuries sustained in battle, the Rubicon Primaris became an unforeseen lifeline, offering a path back to combat readiness by the integration of Primaris organs. To ensure the chapter's continued trustworthiness, the Inner Circle decreed that their apothecarians would oversee the transition of critically wounded warriors into Primaris, ensuring they emerged fully integrated with their Primaris Space Marine organs. Despite the undeniability of power and the utility that would come from them, the lingering reservations persisted amongst the higher-ups within the Inner Circle regarding the former Grey Shields of the Unnumbered Sons, whose allegiance remained a subject of scrutiny, as they had served for much of their lives under the teachings and tutelage of Reboot Guilliman. Within this debate, swirling within the Inner Circle, one voice emerged of particular Interrogator Chaplain Zeref. Having served alongside the 3rd Company in the Callanth Expanse, his testimony carried considerable weight, especially considering his prior skepticism to the Primaris reinforcements ushered in by Guilliman. Supreme Grandmaster Azrael, custodian of the Dark Angel's most guarded secrets, weighed the argument meticulously, with unparalleled insight into the risks and rewards inherent in the decision. Azrael's deliberations were informed by understanding the chapter's history and the pressing demands of the present. Moreover, his first-hand observation of the Grey Shield's prowess and dedication in the line of battle added another layer into the discussion. Deep in contemplation, Grandmaster Azrael grappled with the weight of decision. With the knowledge of the escape of Luther and information about the resurgence and gathering of the fallen in the distant reaches of the Somnium stars, it seemed his hand may be forced. Azrael knew that every unforgiven warrior had to be prepared to confront this looming legion-sized threat head-on. This realization weighed heavily upon the decision to extend the possibility of inducting the entirety of the Inner Circle to become Primaris, and even inducting Grey Shield brethren into the Inner Circle itself. When Azrael's decision was revealed, it sparked outrage amongst many company masters and chapter masters. Unable to disclose the full truth of Luther's escape, Azrael faced the daunting prospect of igniting a second schism within the ranks of the Dark Angels. With the ominous specter of the fallen looming in the Somnium stars, the risk of further division could not be allowed. Drawing upon his considerable diplomatic prowess and leveraging his unwavering commitment to the unforgiven, Supreme Grandmaster Azrael embarked on a mission to test the mettle of one particular brother, Brother Aphrion, a former Grey Shield who had garnered the attention of the Deathwing, whom believed him worthy to ascend to their esteemed ranks. With utmost conviction, Azrael would advocate for his induction, and furthering for his induction into the Inner Circle itself, placing the weight of the Dark Angel's reputation squarely upon the shoulders of this lone warrior. Despite his elevated status, Azrael approached chapter masters of the Unforgiven with humility, which resonated deeply with many. His unwavering belief in this Grey Shield exemplar swayed even the most skeptical amongst them, as they understood Azrael's confidence was not bestowed lightly. Under the watchful eye, Aphrion underwent the rigorous trials, emerging triumphant. And though there were some lingering doubts from some successor chapter masters, the allegiance to Azrael would ultimately eclipse their skepticism. With this issue settled, the Dark Angels and the Unforgiven surged forth into the cosmos with renewed determination, reminiscent of the Lion's own legendary campaigns to cleanse Caliban of all threats, be they traitor, mutant, heretic, or alien alike. Amidst the turmoil of these turbulent times, the Unforgiven exhibited unparalleled coordination, which led to certain inquisitorial circles whispering of legion building, having grown into more clamorous accusations, challenging the integrity of the Dark Angels and their brethren. Yet a myriad of fervent voices now would rise in their defense. The martial prowess of the Unforgiven would stand amidst even the greatest of the Imperium, as an indisputable testament to the Sons of the Lion's strength. Their victories too numerous to tally, their honor unassailable. Amidst these debates and whispers, rumors, psychic echoes, and harrowing confessions of captives hinted at a gathering darkness within the depths of the warp-shrouded Imperium Nihilus. Tales spoke of a convergence of fallen angels in the Somnium stars, and a being who seemed to have hunted many of them down. And with the culmination of the Arcs of Omen campaigns, a monumentous event unfolded. It seemed another legend from the past had awoken. Lionel Johnson emerged from his millennia-long slumber within the depths of the rock, and unlike his brother Primarch Reboot Yeoman, whose expertise lie in matters of governance, the Lion was a warrior, a predator instinctively attuned to the hunt and the kill, and he had awakened to a galaxy gripped by darkness and chaos. As he now traversed the celestial expanse with a singular purpose, retribution. Eventually, he would meet with some of the fallen, who had told tales of their confusion upon his attack on them, believing him a traitor, though eventually this would be cleared up. And long before news of his return echoed amidst the cosmos, whispers of the Lion's deeds circulated amongst the disparate worlds within the Imperial Dominion. From mist-shrouded passages, he emerged, a formidable figure, a guardian who effortlessly dispatched monstrous threats. Some hailed him as a cowled giant or an unforgiving knight, while others, in their fervor, mistakenly likened him to the Emperor incarnate, as his arrival often was preceded by the eerie apparition of ancient forests, materializing and fading into the ethereal realm. The true mechanism of this otherworldly transit remains shrouded in mystery, known solely to the Primarch himself. Yet as he had slumbered beneath the rock, his dreams frequently returned to the dense Carbonite woodlands of his youth, and eventual conversations with a being who could only be noted as the Emperor himself. Yet ironically enough, it would not be the Dark Angels who would be the first to encounter the Primarch in full force, but rather Lord Commander of Imperial Nihilists and the Warden of the North, Chapter Master Dante, and a contingent of Blood Angels. Eventually, the Lion would gain the Emperor's shield, a weapon that would allow him to stand against the now empowered Angron, the demon Primarch of Khorne who had been unleashed upon the galaxy. And with his banishment, the Lion was able to once more take command of his sons, as he would stalk out into the galaxy for retribution against all those who dare attempt to lay claim to his father's realms.